So fortunate to have Bobby and Layla, right? I love the fact that we're led this time by two people who don't have a DNA connection. This is the model that the head and the heart part, right? So we always say that you have the biggest heart if you don't have to do this, but you do it because you want to, because you want to serve others with CF. And so Bobby and Layla, thank you. Thank you for your leadership on that. So now we're looking forward to kicking into one of our favorite events of this weekend. Hopefully it's a favorite event for you as well, and that is to be able to talk about the science. You know, we're taking bold and decisive steps to make sure that we can advance science and care and support for people with CF to the best possible way. And a part of that is just with innovation, part of that's with devotion. And now we're going to highlight some of the specific, exciting efforts that are underway by hearing, as you said, experts in each of these fields. Now, we're going to have opportunities for questions at the end of the presentation, but so go ahead and submit those questions as we go. We're going to try to get to every question. We have plenty of time today, so we're going to try to. We may not be able to, and we'll look for other ways to be able to answer those questions. So I'm going to start by just inviting out our distinguished colleagues, and then I'm going to introduce them. So can you join me in welcoming them to the stage? So, first of all, I'm going to introduce Dr. Stephen Rowe. Many of you know, but exactly. Steve joined the foundation in 2022 as our Executive Vice President and Chief Scientific Officer, and he's respected globally. He's really known throughout medicine, but obviously particularly as a leader in CF research, and brings more than 2 decades of experience to this role, including serving as a principal investigator for the first triple combination therapy Trikafta, which was a transformational milestone for so many people in our community. And as Chief Scientific Officer, Steve oversees our basic and our clinical research. He leads the Foundation's research strategy, the venture philanthropy program, which drives our science forward as we advance innovative therapies for people with cystic fibrosis. So we'll hear from him first. Then we're going to hear from Dara Riva. Dara has worked at the CF Foundation for more than a decade. Yeah, welcome, Dara. So previously, before she came to the foundation, she was a science officer for the congressionally directed medical research programs and a research associate at the Frederick National Laboratory supporting the National Institutes for Allergy and Infectious Disease. So a real science background. But Dara is committed to this work because she wants to find a cure for her 2 children with CF, Maximilian and Penelope, 2 teenagers, which I was hearing about in the back, full of life, doing well, but absolutely committed to that cure. Dara also works with her family to raise funds for the Maryland chapter as a member of the Family Advisory Board at Johns Hopkins, where their children receive their care. So yeah, Maryland team. Where are you, Maryland team? Here we go, yeah. And then last, we'll hear from Dr. Albert Faro, who's our Senior Vice President and Chief Medical Officer. Al received his medical training from the University of Pittsburgh and the Pittsburgh Children's Hospital before joining the Washington University faculty, the Washington University in St. Louis. 10 years ago, Al joined the foundation, and he's been initially directing the CF Foundation's initiative to improve the transplant journey for people with CF and to advance quality improvement initiatives throughout the CF Care Network. And now Al oversees all of our clinical care team, our clinical efforts, and provides strategic leadership in care and research. So now what we're going to hear a bit from each of them about what they're excited about in their areas. Then we'll sit here and we'll dive into some answering your questions. So get those ready as we're going through that. So maybe I'll start off. Steve, can I invite you up to the podium?
Great. Well, thanks very much, Mike. Really great to be here. I arrived last night and was really inspired by some of the stories that I heard on Capitol Hill. But I have to say, I was particularly motivated when Mike Beatty called me out in the middle of a drink at the bar and said to make sure that all the research questions were addressed by the end of the conference. So we've been motivated and we're hard at work, and I hope you'll join me on that adventure. Well, we have really ambitious plans to accelerate our mission. In fact, we are planning through our new 5-year strategic plan to spend $1.5 billion towards our research and care initiatives over just the next 5 years through 2030. And this is an incredibly inspiring and exciting time to be in genetic science. In fact, more and more genetic diseases are beginning to be cured, even if just one patient or two at a time, but you can start to see the momentum building for our ultimate goal of curing CF. So this is an unbelievable moment where the idea of the CRISPR gene editing is starting to come to fruition for real people living with disease. At the same time, there are enormous headwinds that we have to deal with. The amount that we expect to spend to get an approved therapy is at least 10 times greater for a genetic medicine than it has been for CFTR modulators 10 years ago. And there's also headwinds in the regulatory space that we have to address. And we are really pushing new frontiers of science as we try to do this sort of gene editing in the lung, a harder organ to address, and ultimately all across the body. But we are up to the challenge, and I hope you'll see that we are. In fact, we are on very steadfast ground with the enormous success of CFTR modulators. This is a look at the life expectancy plotted by 5-year increments for people with CF. And of course, we were making steady improvements based on great supportive care and other treatments for at least a decade since the early 2000s. You can see that steady improvement. But then, in the last 10 years, with the advent of CFTR modulators, you can see that large uptick in survival and that unbelievable number of age 65 achieved in the most recent 5-year cohort. But we are not standing on that. In fact, we are pushing harder to get even greater CFTR modulators out to as many people as possible that can benefit this. And there are 3 really important programs I want to highlight. One is a company called Sionna, which is developing new and completely different CFTR modulators. In fact, this is a look at that they already have 4 different drugs in development at various stages, both phase 1 in people without CF and phase 2 programs of people with CF, with new CFTR modulators that cause the CFTR protein to fold up correctly at the root cause of nucleotide binding domain 1 misfolding. And we have great promise and laboratory data that will push CFTR function to even higher levels. And of course, we expect that to have substantial clinical benefit. Vertex themselves obviously has Trikafta and Aleptrek now already available to patients, and they're pushing the age limits lower and opening up new patients that are eligible based on CFTR modulator data in the laboratory, some of which was done right at the CF Foundation's Boston lab, that are opening up new patients to those drugs. They're also developing new modulators of their own, again, trying to push the levels of CFTR function even higher. And then you'll hear about from Dara multiple programs the CF Foundation is leading where others might not. And that includes the ability to retest people that might not tolerate Trikafta onto Aleptrek and see how they do and help them try to benefit from modulators where they might not. And an amazing study where we're filling the role called PROTECT that will test CFTR modulators in even unborn children, and we'll tell you about how we are really pushing new frontiers here. But we know that not all people benefit from CFTR modulators, and the median survival for those that cannot benefit or are ineligible for CFTR modulators is lower, possibly by more than even a decade. And if that doesn't motivate you, I will say that we are certainly motivated. It's something that we think about every moment at the Foundation on how we can address this crucial disparity and get the sort of benefit for all people with CF as we flip the switch and turn on the CF gene. So what are we doing in this area? Well, again, approximately 10 to 15% of people with CF are not able to benefit from CFTR modulators. Some of that is because of the mutation they carry. Some of that is because of the adverse effects that they've experienced. And we are addressing this in a number of ways. We have clinical research programs and development programs to address GI symptoms, chronic infection, things like anxiety and depression and mental health. We'll talk about that a little bit later today. CF-related diabetes. and addressing the complexity of care that comes with aging. All that can benefit not only people that are on modulators, but people without, and extend that runway of good health till we ultimately get to our final destination, which is a genetic cure for all people with CF, starting with those that are not eligible. We know very much about those individuals. This is a plot of the percentage of people that are affected by the various mutations that they harbor that we know that we're going to have to address. And under each one is different therapies that we are advancing that could address those mutations, along with approaches that will address people no matter their mutation. Let's take a look at what that pipeline looks like. This is a plot of a current pipeline of the genetic therapies that are moving forward for people that are modulator ineligible. One group of programs is the mRNA programs, and there's 3 different independent programs, all enrolling individuals with CF and advancing to higher and higher doses to try and push the therapeutic limits. And our aspirations here is to really help stop the clock of advancing CF lung disease with these therapies, and also to learn as much as possible, because these use lipid carriers that we think are going to be essential to delivering the genetic therapy of the future that ultimately cures the disease. We also have a program called from SpliceSense that's using an antisense oligonucleotide. This is really the beginnings of one of the easier things to deliver in the genetic therapy space, because these are very short nucleotides, unlike the longer pieces of DNA and RNA that we have to deliver to fully edit the CF genome. And one of the reasons that we're really excited about this therapy, even though it will only apply to small numbers of people with CF, people with specific mutations that cause splicing defects, is that antisense oligonucleotides have been shown to be extremely effective for particular genetic diseases. There's a genetic disease called spinal muscular atrophy, or SMA for short, that essentially causes babies to die early in life because of a polio-like illness from their gene. And what has been shown is that if you can give an antisense oligonucleotide for those sorts of diseases, those babies can go on to walk, and they appear to be living normal lives. It's one of the amazing stories in genetic medicine. In fact, SpliceSense has shown if they use an antisense oligonucleotide and inhale it to people with CF with a splicing mutation, that their lung function is improving. We got that evidence just in the last few months. It's actually the first piece of evidence that we have that a genetic therapy that's inhaled can bump up lung function by restoring the CFTR protein genetically. So we are launching into that and fully supporting SpliceSense at the next phase, and also trying to design those studies so that we can extract as much learning as possible to teach us about what needs to happen next. We also have gene addition therapies and gene editing therapies that we're particularly excited about, and I'll tell you about some of those on the next slide. All of this is the programs in development, so we talk about those a lot, but you should know that there's over 40 funded academic labs that are all advancing different genetic strategies as fast as possible and generating new ideas that we think will go on to become trials. And we'll talk about some of those in the question and answer period. And those investigators are remarkable, and they're advancing all sorts of basic science questions that are going to be essential to us to ultimately delivering a permanent cure to all people with CF. Now, a couple of those programs that are in the gene addition category, I want to tell you about just a little bit more because they're active right now and enrolling and looking for participants willing to advance these treatments. One is by 4D Molecular Therapeutics. It's advancing an adeno-associated virus, or an AAV. It's called A101, or sometimes called 4D710 in the form of a drug. And it's being led by the principal investigator, Jennifer Taylor, who's right here in the room. So you're welcome to ask her about it. One of the things that's quite unique about this is right now it's being tested as a single dose administration. Ultimately, we expect that it might have to be delivered once or twice a year if it's effective. And it's been able to show that the genetic material is reaching down to the lung and starting to express the CFTR protein. So what the studies are now doing is trying to see if we can translate that into clinical benefit. It's a very important program for us, and one that we're leaning in and co-designing the next cohorts with that team. Another is called Crystal Bio. They're using a different virus to deliver the gene. It's unique because it's using a different virus. It's called HSV, and it's a virus that can hold a large package. It can hold a large package, and that's important because we can fit the whole CFTR protein and the engineering machinery in that. You could imagine swapping that material out to do gene editing later in the future. It's also important because they have successfully used this virus for a terrible skin disease, a genetic disease of the skin for which people can put on this sort of gene vector and cause the gene to be expressed in their skin and repair their wounds. So that's already been approved, and now Crystal Bio is trying to use that same sort of technology to help people with CF. And of course, we're co-designing those studies, including helping them with their FDA interactions as they plan their next study features. Crystal Bio is also developing other modalities to help other lung diseases. So again, as we push into the frontier of the lung, we have the best partners in the world advancing in this area. When we get to our final destination of gene editing to try and permanently fix the gene, the real name of the game right now is delivery. We already can, in the lab, basically cure CF by doing gene editing, and we expect that to be permanent. But we haven't yet been able to do that in people, and what is holding us up is the packaging material that has to deliver that gene editing machinery to the right time, to the right cells. And right now, I've already described a few programs that are using viruses to deliver genetic material. There's also a number of non-viral programs that are in the clinic. That includes the mRNA programs, which are in the top left lipid nanoparticle category. But we have preclinical programs and researchers both in the academia and in pharmaceutical companies trying to develop the new packaging or the delivery modalities of the future. And soon as we can crack that nut, we are ready to go as fast as possible to try and bring gene editing to people. And in fact, we are right now negotiating new partnerships between what we see as the best delivery vehicles with those with the best gene editors to try and accelerate that even further. And I've been spending a lot of time talking about gene editing and gene therapies. We are also funding research that is catalyzing treatment to reduce the disease burden. We know that all people with CF have trouble with infections and manifestations. And one of my dreams when I first started this job was that we could eventually target biofilms. Biofilms are that sticky coated material that keeps and protects bacteria and cause them to not go away, even though people with CF take antibiotics on a regular basis. They stick around because they are sticking inside the lung and shielding themselves and then repopulating when the antibiotics are stopped. If we could interfere with that mechanism, my hope is that people all people with CF that have infections, and even people that are on modulators that have intermittent problems with infection could benefit from this type of therapy to disrupt the biofilms. Well, a discovery was made at one of our funded laboratories that ultimately generated a company called Clarametyx, and we funded them a few years ago to start a new program with an antibody directed at those biofilms that is blasting those biofilms down. And what we learned in January this year is that they had new top-line result, an entire new modality, not just an antibiotic, but this anti-biofilm strategy that started to work in people with CF, and they are now advancing that, not only in people with CF, but in other diseases that have chronic infections caused by biofilms. A few others I'll just mention really quickly. We're interested in trying to use phage to our advantage to help blast bacteria in other ways. And we are investing in a company that's using a next-generation phage program that's using genetic engineering along with the phage to kill bacteria like Pseudomonas. We have a new partnership with a nonprofit called NCATE that populates the best of the best in antimicrobial resistant modalities. So we're partnering with them to help them select what sort of discoveries and programs should be moved into the clinic, and we expect fruit there that will bear fruit for people with CF in the near future. And then finally, we heard from the community through our community voice program something loud and clear, and I'm really proud of the cycle that we've now completed with this. We heard that people with CF are really worried about how they're going to detect the bacteria in the future as the sputum starts to be reduced, even though we know through basic programs that the bacteria are still there in the lung. So we've now invested in 2, and we're looking at a third, a program to help us detect Pseudomonas with non-invasive means instead of having to rely on sputum. So that, looking for exciting treatment modality, things like cards or simple blood tests or simple breathing tests that can then be used with their doctor to help decide if they need to continue to take TOE or if they can stop it or if a new bacteria has arisen. So I hope you've heard in this introduction, we are advancing the boundaries of what's possible. We are building the research tools that don't exist to bring gene editing and permanent cures to people, and we are forging new pathways to do it. We will not stop until it's done. And with that, I'm going to invite Dara Riva to the stage.
Thank you, thank you. I'm going to have to bring these mics down a little bit. Hi, friends. Thank you for having me today so I can give you an update on our academic research portfolio. So what do I mean by academic research? This is very different from what Steve was just talking about. This is really research that's happening at our care centers or at institutions that are associated with our care centers. And the goal really isn't drug development or really working with companies, but the goals of this type of research is to help us understand CF better, understand why and how we have complications, and how we can best treat CF complications. So this is what I'm flashing on the screen right now. This slide is just a snippet of what we have going on the academic side. I don't have time to go through all of these studies today. They only said I had 10 minutes. But you can find more information about these studies on our Trials Finder. So if you go to cff.org and look for our Clinical Trials Finder, you can find information about these studies. But before I move on, I do want to highlight 2 studies that are on here that are just getting started. So this is the interactive part of my program. Raise your hand if this scenario sounds familiar. My child has a new cough. I call the CF clinic and I talk to the nurse and they prescribe an oral antibiotic over the phone. Does that happen to anybody else? Well, the truth of the matter is we don't really understand if antibiotics are necessary. So we have STOP PEDS, which is a study that's going to help give us some more information on when and how to use oral antibiotics in children. So STOP PEDS plans to enroll patients, and they will either start antibiotics right away, or they will wait to start antibiotics and see if we can hold off on those antibiotics. In their pilot study, those groups of individuals that got randomized to the group that didn't get oral antibiotics, they were actually able to prevent antibiotic use in 70% of those participants. So really, an incredible way for us to think about how to decrease the burden of antibiotic use in our children. The other study I want to talk to you about is REACT. This study is going to help us learn about how to use hypertonic saline and pomazyme in children ages 3 through 16. So again, they are going to group children based on whether they are starting or stopping hypertonic saline or pomazyme. They're going to follow these children for a year and then compare the differences. And again, we hope that this is going to give us information that you can take then to your providers and make better informed decisions. But for the rest of my time, I want to take a deeper dive into some of these other studies. So Steve did mention PROTECT, and this is a really incredible study that I get to share with you, and the PI is actually in the room. I remember when my son was diagnosed with meconium ileus, and really the only option we had was to just hope that it resolved on its own. But it didn't, spoiler. But what we are finding is there's a growing body of evidence that suggests if a CF carrier mother is given modulators while she's pregnant, that it can have certain benefits to her CF child before the child is born. Really mind-blowing. So we're developing a study to really help us learn more about this. And we started seeing this first in animal studies. And I'm just going to tell you about a couple. So one animal study, the mom animal that was a CF carrier was given modulators, and the offspring actually had improved pancreatic function. So this was our first evidence that we started to see that this was possible. In a second study, the mother was a CF carrier animal and was given modulators, and the male offsprings, it actually helped prevent the reproductive complications that we see in males with CF. And those male offspring animals had sustained fertility. Like, mind-blowing. So we want to study this more. And we started to gather some data in people through case studies in the United States as well as in Europe. And what we are learning is that this is generally safe, but in people, we are seeing a bit of a mixed bag in terms of what benefits we see and what we don't. For instance, in some case studies, there have been reports that giving modulators while the mother is still pregnant can resolve meconium ileus in utero. There has also been case studies that have reported that when the child is born after having modulators in utero, that their sweat chloride tests are actually below what the cutoff is for CF. So this is really, again, incredible things to start to think about. But because there is some differences where some case studies have shown that there hasn't been much benefit to show of it, we really need to study this more in a very systematic, rigorous way. So we are designing the PROTECT study that, again, will just follow the health outcomes of women, CF carriers who are able to access TRIKAFTA and can join this study, and will follow their health outcomes and the health outcomes of their newborns. This study is in its very early planning phases. We expect to be able to share more with you later in 2026 and early 2027. The next study I want to talk to you about is RETRIAL. And I have friends and I know adults that have had children that try TRIKAFTA, or adults that have tried TRIKAFTA and have to stop because of either changes in their mental health or changes related to their liver and having liver issues. And we know that there are people who cannot tolerate TRIKAFTA or tolerate modulators because of these changes. We don't know why this happens, and it is very difficult to pinpoint an exact cause, but what we can do is study those individuals who stop TRIKAFTA who may want to try a left track. So what we have designed is an observational study to monitor the mental health and liver function in individuals who had experienced mood, anxiety, inability to sleep, all of these mental health changes, or who have experienced liver-related issues and had to stop TRIKAFTA, but want to start a left track. And the goal is really to track the safety and the well-being of these individuals as they restart these modulators. And what it does for us is really help us understand how patients respond when they do restart these modulators. So RETRIAL is being conducted across 15 sites in the United States. However, you do not need to be at one of these sites to participate in the study. There is a component of the study that is completely remote. So if you or a friend is interested in this, I encourage you to go to our trial finder, look for a site that's closest to you, and you will be able to get in touch with someone who can help you get into that enrollment process. Very exciting stuff, very timely to do this research, and it is about halfway through enrollment, which is great, but we still are looking for additional participants. And finally, I want to talk to you about GI complications. And you see a QR code, so you know I'm going to ask you to take out your phones, right? So take out your phones and get to the link to this survey. Don't do the survey yet, though, because Dr. Alfaro has some great presentation and I want you to pay attention to that. But after we are finished here, please go and do this survey. We really need to do a deep dive in understanding what are the GI complications that are most common, that are the most difficult to treat, and really help us identify where are those areas where the CF Foundation can have an impact on improving GI symptoms. So time and time again, when we survey the community, and we saw this with our 5-year strategic planning, GI symptoms rises to the top in terms of research priorities to the community, but also as being reported as one of the most burdensome parts of this disease. So we have ensured that we have, in our 5-year strategic plan, a strategy to address GI complications. And the GI task force was created to really help build that strategy for the next 5 years. One thing that we have learned is that to move the needle on GI complications to really see improvements, it's going to take coordination and collaboration between our researchers and those that are providing care. This is something that we've not done before, but we really feel is an important step into making progress into improving GI complications. So we've been doing a lot of meeting with GI doctors and researchers to understand what they think are our opportunities and what are our challenges. We're going to be surveying, like I mentioned, that survey that I'd like you to take, to understand what the community and providers feel are our biggest challenges. And then finally, we're going to be doing a workshop over the summer. And the workshop is going to be 2 parts. The first part is going to be really focused on new technologies that can be used to diagnose GI complications. So thinking beyond those patient-reported outcomes where they ask, do you feel constipated? Check yes, check no. But really looking at more imaging, looking at more diagnostic tests that can actually evaluate how food goes through the digestive system. So some really neat technologies are out there. The second half of the workshop is going to be focused on new therapies that we could probably borrow from other disorders and use them in people with CF. So if you think about irritable bowel disease, for instance, what therapies do they have that could possibly work in people with CF? So we really want to dive into that with our GI experts. But we will also have community members at this workshop. So you will see from Community Voice a call for people to apply to participate in this workshop. I do want to warn you, though, it's a GI workshop. There will be a lot of poop jokes. If you've ever worked with a GI, they're a hoot, so full disclosure. But I really am very excited about the progress that we're making in addressing GI symptoms. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Al.
Thank you, Dara. So many important questions, so much learning, and it's so great to have Dara involved in all of that, isn't it? Well, thank you all for being here. It's always such a pleasure for me to be able to join you. Today, I'm going to take the next few minutes to share a brief update on the state of cystic fibrosis care, where we've made progress, how the CF population is changing. Hopefully, you'll see the trends that are emerging, and what that means for how we think about CF care delivery in the future. As I hope you'll see, the data tells a powerful story. People with CF are living longer, fuller lives. But with that progress comes new clinical complexity, new care needs across a lifespan. And we face real pressures on our care delivery system. For those of you who were marching on the Hill, that's what you were doing yesterday, right? Addressing some of that. So I will be highlighting the data from the CF Foundation Patient Registry. This data is available to you on our website. And in addition, there's an interactive highlights report. It's really cool to play with it, and I really encourage you to visit the site. You've already heard this, but a baby born today with CF has a median predicted survival of 65 years. Now remember, median means that 50% of those will have a greater than 65 year. A remarkable tribute to this community, to each of you. Now, I know many of you are asking, okay, that's all fine and good, but what about an adult who's living with CF today? Well, our registry folks have an answer for that. It's called the median predicted conditional survival. So, for example, on this bar graph, what you see in blue is the attained age. So let's go all the way to the one end where it's 50. The blue bar ends at 50 years of age. So for a person living with CF today who's 50 years old, the median conditional predicted survival is 75. Now, it is important to note that this extraordinary progress is not uniform across the entire CF population. We know there are people who are not eligible for modulators, there are people who don't tolerate modulators, and there are people today who still do not have access to modulators, which just underlines the work that we still have ahead of us. Now, one of the most important trends, obviously, is this aging CF population. If you look at this chart from 2014 to 2024, over the past decade, the number of adults aged 50 and older, and that's in blue, so I hope you can appreciate how that blue portion of these bars gets bigger and bigger. In fact, over the last 10 years, that blue portion has grown by 124%. More than double over a decade. At the same time, I want you to take your eyes to the green. That reflects the pediatric population. And you can see the pediatric population is actually getting smaller. Some of that is relative because the adult population is growing so quickly, and some of that is because there are fewer new pediatric diagnoses for CF. Now, as the population gets older, it gets more complex. So a natural question to ask is, how are people actually engaging with their care? Which brings me to this. What you see here is the average number of clinic visits per person in the registry over the last 8 years or so. And hopefully you can appreciate how from 2017, where it was 4.76, to 2024, 3.71, there's been a decrease in annual visits. In addition, in red, that reflects visits that are made through telemedicine. And you can see that big spike in 2020 when COVID hit. And since then, there's been a decline, and fairly recently, a more stable 18 to 19% of CF clinic visits are using telemedicine, which raises issues as we consider what the future of CF care delivery should be or will be. Now, another important trend emerging from the registry is a growing proportion of adults with CF who are overweight or obese. That's reflected in the increasing blue and green bars that you can see over time on this graph. Now, we're seeing similar patterns with rising rates of bone disease, CF-related diabetes. I'm not going to show those in the interest of time. These shifts toward longer survival and more metabolic and GI-related conditions have important downstream implications. One of them is cancer risk. And I don't know if everyone knows, but March is actually colon cancer screening awareness month. As people with CF live longer, colorectal cancer has emerged as a critical and preventable risk, making screening more important than ever. Now, we have established guidelines. So people with CF age 40 and older should be getting screened every 5 years. Transplant recipients should be screened earlier and more frequently. And then, depending on findings, the cadence of follow-up visits or screenings may change. What this data, I hope you will see, clearly shows is that we still have a lot of work to do. So that line graph that you see on the bottom, where I want your eyes to go is that there are centers, in fact, the best performing center screened 92.3% of their eligible population with colonoscopy. On the other extreme, there are centers who have screened zero of their eligible patients. Now, this is even more important. Of the dozens of studies that Dara showed on that slide, one of them was called NICE-CF. And the results are in, they're being peer reviewed, but the authors were kind enough to allow me to share the outcome of that study. That study looked at stool testing, so kind of all those commercials you see like for Cologuard and stuff like that, for people with CF to see if that was similar in effectiveness in identifying colon cancer in people with CF to colonoscopy. It is not. It is inadequate. Colonoscopy is the only adequate way to screen for colon cancer in people with CF. We are working to raise awareness among our care teams to the importance so that we can move some of those centers that have zero people screened. But screening is a partnership. It requires that people with CF participate in the screening and the follow-through. It is so critical. So be sure to go home and tell your loved ones how important it is to be screened. Now, many of you have seen this slide in the past. It reflects our CF Care Center network. And there are some 283 accredited care programs throughout the country. And this remains central to delivering high-quality specialized care. As the population changes, we're exploring ways to strengthen this network, expanding appropriate use of telehealth, and connecting people with CF with a broader set of specialists and primary care providers. This approach is grounded in an updated vision for the CF care team that we published over a year ago, and I believe Dr. Whitney Brown at last year's VLC talked about this. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail around this slide, but what I want to share is that this framework acknowledges that caring for people with CF increasingly involves a broader set of health professionals over a longer lifespan. It formalizes the role of essential partners and trained and trusted consultants who work with the core CF team to address the needs of people with CF, the center of all of this. Our goal is to ensure timely access to the right expertise, whether that's endocrinology, mental health, gastroenterology, even when that expertise is not available at a person's care center. And in the years ahead, we'll be piloting models that make that access more consistent. We recognize that right now, it's something that we need to continue to improve and work on. And in the years ahead, and in this framework isn't static. It's a blueprint. It's a roadmap for the pilots and innovations that will be occurring over the years ahead. The next step in evolving CF care so that it can deliver on the vision amid growing complexity and, again, real sustainability pressures. Now, the CF care model has delivered extraordinary outcomes. but it's now operating in a very different environment than the one it was designed for. This slide highlights why evolution is needed now and how we're approaching it thoughtfully. There are two specific mandates that we see on the care delivery side. First, can't say it enough, the mission faces real sustainability headwinds. Centers are already reporting concerns, including one of the trends you saw, decreasing inpatient volumes and clinic volumes. There are the cuts to Medicaid. There are increased cost pressures from hospital administrators, reduced willingness to fund interdisciplinary care. And on top of all that, there are real ongoing workforce shortage issues. At the same time, people with CF are telling us something really important. Access matters, and access needs to be broader. As pulmonary disease becomes less predominant, which is great news, we're seeing increased needs for endocrinology, gastroenterology, mental health. Longer lifespans, also great news, mean greater demand for CF care or for care that is CF competent, not directly CF related. So that could be obstetrics or oncology. And as the care and the needs of the patient population become more complex, people with CF are asking for more help to navigate the system. So I'll let you read the slide, the summary slide, but I'm going to close with this. I hope what you saw in the data and what you all see and hear is that CF care has changed lives. People with CF are living longer, fuller lives because of the extraordinary commitment of this community. You. Our responsibility now is to make sure that progress continues, that every person with CF can access high-quality, specialized care as their needs change over a lifetime. That will require evolving how we deliver care, using data wisely, and being willing to be bold and test and improve together. If we do this, we won't just sustain the CF care model. We'll ensure that it remains relevant and worthy of the people it deserves. So thank you for your attention.
All right, well, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Dara. Thank you, Al. That wraps up the lecture part of this. I think hopefully you can just see the number of different projects that are going on in literally every aspect of CF. But let's dive in on questions, and we have a lot of them, so we're gonna go. Actually, maybe I'm gonna start with a question for each of you, and then we'll just sort of go as the list occurs. Steve, I'm gonna start one with you, and that is, been reading a lot about baby KJ's case, and what do we learn from that? How does it apply to CF? Are there any insights that are gonna shape our approach to future treatments?
Sure, happy to talk about this. When I started, and I said this is one of the most exciting times in genetic medicine, I was thinking in part about the baby KJ experience and what's happened. So baby KJ was born with a terrible inborn defect of inborn error metabolism. So a metabolic defect that affects the urea cycle that would normally cause this baby to die early. And what these researchers did was sequence the gene, found the cause of the urea cycle defect, then looked at the specific sequence of that gene that was mutated, found a new editor for this unique mutation that had never previously been described, found an editor that worked for it, got it efficient enough in the lab, and then treated that baby with it with a lipid nanoparticle to carry it to the liver. And we know that urea cycle defects are a problem from the liver metabolism. So this really had a promise to work well. The investigators gave that unique gene editor for this unique baby situation 3 times, and the urea levels that are detected in that baby went back down to normal. And it looks like now, 6 months later, that everything is being developed normal for baby KJ. It's an incredibly remarkable story. It's led to enormous energy at the FDA on how to basically make this happen over and over again. All of what I described happened in less than a year. Less than a year, a brand new disease was defined, the genetic cause, the drug developed, and it was given to that baby for the cure. So if that can happen for that, I want it to happen for people with CF. So this is why there's enormous excitement about that, and the FDA and other scientists are thinking, how do we industrialize that? So we have a bigger challenge. The challenge is how to get it through to the lung. That's why we're focusing on delivery. I talked about that. But in terms of how fast we could develop a gene editing technology that would be unique to the individual, I feel like all systems go.
Yeah, and I think it highlights, you had said before, that we can cure CF in our lab, right? We have that editing, we have the same ability to do with baby KJ. The difference is the liver is a lot easier to target. We have to figure out the lung part and those right cells. So, but it gives hope. It gives hope, right?
Exactly, and we are starting to contemplate how we can start to do that first in a few people, and then later even more people with CF.
Love it. So stay tuned. I'll talk a little bit more about this afternoon. That's the future. That's the path towards the cure. I'll tell you that. Dara, a lot of questions about diabetes here. So you could talk some more about what's the future hold for CF-related diabetes and the research we're doing.
Absolutely. So the other, very burdensome part of CF is CF-related diabetes. And we have what is called the bionic pancreas in trials right now. What this is a combination of a continuous glucose monitor with an insulin pump. But this thing is very intelligent, and it can actually learn your eating patterns. So currently, the device is out right now. You have to enter whenever you eat. You have to guess how many carbohydrates you have, and you have to put this into the app, and then it will calculate how much insulin goes into your pump. But this device actually uses AI machine learning to learn your eating habits. So you don't have to enter your diet into the app each time. This device was approved for type 1 diabetes a couple years ago. And what we're trying to do is get cystic fibrosis on the label so we can get insurance coverage for this device. So that's one thing. The other thing that we're really looking at is people with CF are living longer and living with CF-related diabetes longer. And what we don't know is what are those long-term complications that people with CFRD are going to experience as they move into their 50s, 60s, and beyond, as I was mentioning. So we have a study called Spectrum, which is going to help us understand what is the prevalence of some of these long-term complications in the CFRD population now, and what can we do to help make sure that we're monitoring for these long-term complications moving forward. So those are 2 studies that I think are very interesting, and I'm excited to see results.
We'll look forward to an update at the next VLC.
Yes.
On that. Al, one for you, especially given your background, is about lung transplantation and advanced lung disease. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this afternoon, but 4.5% of people with CF have had a lung transplant, 1,500 people. 1,500. And so this is an important part of our community. It's easy to focus on new therapies, but this is part of our family, right? And so talk to us about lung transplant.
Yeah, Sure. So hopefully, as many of you recall, we started an initiative some 8 years ago, built a consortium of 15 of the biggest transplant sites in North America, started a longitudinal observational study of chronic lung allograft dysfunction. This is a manifestation of chronic rejection in lung transplant recipients. It is the biggest barrier to achieving the long-term outcomes that we all want to see for lung transplant recipients. And it's been a challenge to even understand the mechanisms. much less get to therapies to treat it. And so we have been collecting data through a registry specifically for that patient cohort and collecting samples for studies to better understand why CLAD develops. We've been doing this in partnership with a biorepository at Cleveland Clinic. We enrolled almost 1,400 patients into this study. 40% of them have cystic fibrosis. And now we get to follow that cohort over time and make that data available to investigators who are asking relevant questions to help us understand why people develop chronic rejection. So that's really the biggest project involved, but there are so many other projects that we're involved in as well around the lung transplant work. I will say one of the biggest things has been a change in culture and how these programs have worked together, and it's been noticed. It's been noticed by the NIH, so that for the first time, there isn't just one big interventional trial. So in other words, looking at a medicine in lung transplant recipients, there are right now 2 large funded NIH studies looking to see if a certain drug can help prevent rejection in CLAD. So that's a huge, huge kudos to this community for having established that culture, and people noticed, and it's made a difference.
And I want to say, I've noticed the difference at Johns Hopkins, where you're talking about working with the transplant team, that I think this is a really important point for everybody to take home. A lot of times when we think about how we can address this specific problem, we think, oh, I need a new drug. New drugs are hard. They take years and years. There are so many other ways, along with developing new drugs, where we can make a difference and improve outcomes by using some of the tools we have. And a perfect example is with transplant, where the transplant team at Johns Hopkins used to feel very separate from the CF team. Now we're in close contact with each other. There really is a coordination, which makes care 1,000 times better. And we're working on new drugs, but it's not the new drug which is actually making the biggest change. It's actually somebody using the tools we have and coordinating that well. So thank you for that. Steve, we're going to come back to you. Computer Bob, I don't know if he's here or if he's online, either one. We had the first question. They said, talk about the RNA therapies. Which one's the furthest along? Where are we at with this? Give us an update on the RNA.
Sure. I forgot to mention one other thing about KJ. The investigator that discovered that is Dr. Mansourou, and he'll be talking about at the North American meeting.
Yeah.
So come join us there if you want to hear more. And I'll be up in CM to figure out how we do this in CF in just a month. Yeah. Okay. The 3 mRNA programs are Vertex. One sponsored by Vertex, one sponsored by ReCode, and one sponsored by Arcturus. Vertex is currently dosing. They found a middle dose that they think is going to be most likely to succeed, and they're dosing patients with ivacaftor to see if they can boost that signal. At the same time, the company ReCode is doing the same. They found a middle dose that they think is most likely to work best, and they're combining that with ivacaftor right now to, again, boost that signal forward, and we're seeing patients enroll and looking for results there. And then the third is a particle by Arcturus, and they're right in the middle of advancing doses in people with CF. So they've just opened up their highest dose, and we're looking for those results.
Great. I'm going to do one follow-up with you since we're on genetic technologies, and that is, how close are we to a phase 3 trial for 4D, the 4D study?
They are certainly contemplating.
Remind me what that is.
Okay, yeah. Sorry. So 4DMT is one of the programs that I mentioned on an individual slide. It's an adeno-associated virus. It's a gene addition therapy. The virus only fits a portion of CFTR, so they're applying a portion of CFTR. And what they've been able to present so far publicly is that patients they found a dose that is tolerated, and they're starting to see mRNA and protein being produced by the cells. And what we're trying to do now is to continue to refine the dose and then advance that in enough individuals that we can start to measure whether or not clinical benefit is occurring. It's too early to know that yet, and so that's what we're doing now. We'd call that basically a phase 2B effort. If that looked good, then a phase 3 would commence. So we're already contemplating what that might look like, planning for success.
Great. Dara, there was a lot of excitement about the PROTECT study. As a matter of fact, there's probably 5 questions that are on here that are all related. So I think one of the questions was, if you are pregnant, do you get access to Trikafta by enrolling in this, or do you need to source this through other ones? They also said, what about if you're a CF mom and you're pregnant? Is that plug into that, or is that a different study? So can you give us a few more details about the PROTECT and maybe the MAYFLOWER study?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have CF, then we have really used the MAYFLOWER study to help us understand how modulators, how you may take modulators when you're pregnant. And the MAYFLOWER study is actually done enrolling, and we should be seeing results soon. And really, again, following the health outcomes of people with CF, women with CF who are pregnant, and following the health outcomes of their infants as well. So PROTECT is really going to enroll only CF carrier mothers. And unfortunately, we can't provide access to Trikafta. And this is really going to fall on the participants' hands to try to get access to Trikafta. Some people have great success. Some people have not such great success. But again, gathering this information, we hope, will be very important in trying to improve access to this drug. So starting to build that data, starting to systematically and very rigorously understand what those health outcomes are and what are those potential benefits.
I think particularly, thank you. The specifics on that a lot of time are appealing to your insurance company using some of the data that we've already created to talk about that. So it's a way of being able to, it's not just a plea, but it's actually saying, here's what we've seen, and actually had increasing success with insurance companies in terms of providing that.
Can I add? I'm sorry, Steve.
Yeah.
We do have a research working group that has also been helping kind of side by side with the PROTECT study group. And they have developed educational materials for CF carrier mothers as well as OBGYNs to help educate them on what this could do and how to potentially get access. So there are resources being developed to help facilitate that.
And I just wanted to add on how remarkable this is so that everybody understands it. I mean, this is too risky an area for pharmaceutical companies to develop. They can't touch it. But we are going in to try and help solve this problem. And working with our investigators, working with the mothers, working with families to try to do the best we can to carve new frontiers and ultimately, help babies with CF in new ways. So I just want you to know how amazing that effort really is.
Really well set up, yeah. When I talked this afternoon, one of the things that we've challenged ourselves is to say, what are the things that only we can do as a foundation? As you said, drug companies can't do this. This would be a perfect example of one that says, we're gonna lead on this, we're gonna support, we're gonna make a difference because we know that people with CF and their loved ones and their babies need this. And so thank you for pointing that out, Steve. Dr. Faro, maybe 2 for you. One of these is a question about, is there anything new going on in liver disease? Anything that's happening there? I'll start with that one.
Yeah, so we may want to have Dara talk about some of the research, but we have incorporated into a lot of the studies that are looking at the effects of modulators, understanding what's happening with the liver. There is a fair bit of variability that occurs in some of these tests, and trying to better understand what these results mean, what the variability may mean, is a very important subject of research moving forward. It's going to be part of the conversation around that GI task force that Dara talked about a little bit earlier. We just published guidelines within the last couple of years to help better provide definitions around hepatobiliary disease and cystic fibrosis. how to monitor, and there's specific different monitoring frequencies for pediatric and adult. We have a little bit of a better idea of what the natural history of CF liver disease is in children. We don't have a great idea of what that natural history is in adults, and we would like to learn more about that, and thinking again about ways to monitor people more closely.
Perfect. Dara, do you want to add anything on the liver side?
I have plans. No, this is a research gap. This is a definitely identified research gap, and we're hoping that the GI task force can really start to identify where we can make an impact here. So more to come. Maybe next VLC we'll have more information.
Yeah, although I might add a little bit because we'll mention that we're particularly interested in adult liver disease, right? We're laughing because we literally had a call on this just a couple days ago as we talked about this. And is Mark Harvey here? I don't know if Mark's here, if he's coming later on. But we're basically committed to making a difference in adult liver disease and really understanding better than ever before, not just the portal hypertension part of people that have cirrhosis, but what exactly is going on. There's some changing. CF is changing now, whether it's related to modulators, whether it's living longer, whether it's some of the changes of gaining weight. We're going to dive in and have a study that specifically looks at characterizing adult liver disease. And I mentioned Mark because he's stepped forward and actually said, hey, I want to help support this through my foundation with a donation. So stay tuned, as we say. This will be there. Al, one very specific question. Oh, you have something else?
Well, yeah, since Steve plugged one of the plenaries, I want to plug another plenary.
Yes.
So at NACFC this year, we will have a plenary on liver and pancreatic disease. So stay and come to that one.
This has been something we've been talking about for years. This is the year when we're going to both review where we're at with the liver disease, but also provide some of that vision for going forward. We always view those times as a call to action for the CF science community. So liver call to action coming your way. Come join us at NACFC. Al, one of the very specific questions was from you, Breslin, wherever you is, said, I noticed there wasn't an Alaska center or Hawaii center on the map. How are they getting care?
Yes. So actually, there has been an affiliate in Alaska. Actually, Dr. Roberts had for decades has been there, and then in Hawaii, it has been a pediatric pulmonologist, but not a center, and sweat testing has been performed at I think it's Triplet that's out there. And in fact, Dr. Whitney Brown, who's in the audience, has been instrumental and in fact sacrificed and went and visited the team in Hawaii. And we are working to establish an affiliate care team in Hawaii.
Well done.
It is coming.
Well done. I did get a little suspicious when she said she would need 7 visits to make sure that the center really got up and going. So, Steve, let's go, and actually maybe this is a Steve and Dara thing, but questions about infection. So one of these is what about NTM? This continues to be a problem. Are there things, one of the questions was, can phage help with that? What other work are we doing in that area? So I don't know, maybe I'll throw it out as well. Well, we'll start with there. Start with that.
So we have some incredible work that goes on through National Jewish, 2 main studies called Patients and PROTECT. And these are studies that have been going on for years that have really been focused on helping us monitor people who cultured NTM, but also when they start to see symptoms of NTM pulmonary disease, trying to standardize treatment for that population. One part of Patients and PREDICT is actually a study called PostStamps, where we are giving phage therapy under compassionate use to people with NTM disease that are not responding well to treatment. So absolutely we're thinking about phage and NTM. Now, we have learned a lot about NTM, and the Patients and PREDICT studies are slowly starting to wind down now, and we will start getting our information and the results from those studies. But as we wind that down, we're actually going to be evolving that into what is called the Special Pathogens Analysis and Research Consortium, or SPARC. And NTM will be part of that, as well as Achromobacter and Burkholderia. And we will, again, start to think about how we can standardize treatment, how can we improve or optimize the current therapies. So a lot of great work happening in those less common, more rare pathogens.
That's great. Maybe I'll just also say, I think one of the things that our approach that we're taking, it's easy to say, what about Burkholderia sinusopatia? What about Achromobacter? Or each of these. Again, it's hard to say we're going to develop a drug for just one type of pathogen that a small number of people have. But the approaches we're taking are approaches that can bridge across multiple resistance. So you mentioned Clarametyx. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how that would work and how that could help multiple type of pathogens?
Yeah, I'll talk about that in particular and then generalize it too. So again, the Clarametyx program is breaking up the biofilms, that thick, sticky proteins that cause bacteria to bind together and stick to the surface of the airway walls and keep it from dying. When you give even antibiotics that would normally kill that bacteria, they're protected like a shield. So you could imagine if Clarametyx were to work as intended, and so far so good based on the clinical data, it would break up the biofilm so that the antibiotics can get in and kill those bacteria and cause them to be unstuck, and then therefore more likely to be permanently eradicated in the presence of antimicrobial therapy. So that's the hope. And given the success that they've had in CF, they're helping build upon another theme that we have very much worked on and are starting to roll out. And that is to start to think about how anti-inflammatories and antibacterial things can be developed, not just for people with CF, but in people with related conditions that are very much similar. This is other forms of bronchiectasis, and sometimes we've called this initiative internally the one bronchiectasis group. We've already seen a couple of companies being willing to do this, to bring an anti-inflammatory molecule and test that not just in CF, and not just in bronchiectasis, but to pool those groups together and treat. And this is a really, really good thing, and because the number of people with CF that really can enter and qualify for the clinical trials for any one individual antibiotic, like Burkholderia, like atypical mycobacteria, is getting a lot smaller. So us to successfully on our own being able to develop that is harder. So if we could combine forces with these other modalities and figure out when it's safe to combine them, when it's not, to successfully develop these drugs, we'll be a lot better off. So I think we've got several already where we're starting to see this happen. One's enrolling. There are others that are right around the corner, and then we are leading studies to combine those populations to figure out the outcome measures that'll work the best. So we're paving the way.
That's great. We're down to 7 minutes and 23 seconds, so we're going to go into...
Time to go faster?
Well, no, it's perfect. So I'm going to ask you in a second about mental health and modulators, so get ready for that. But there was one question I thought was interesting, which was, what are the COVID data that enabled us to start to tinker some with the attendance policy for people with CF? And since I was involved with that, maybe I'll take that. I think we started with, say, safety first, which was a one person with CF per event. But there was always a part of us that said, events are so different. We could have something like NACFC where you have an entire convention center and you could have another one maybe in somebody's living room. And approaching those as one per person with CF doesn't make a lot of sense, right? And you think about this room, if you have one person with CF on this end and that one person on that end, then there's not a lot of risk there. The specific data in COVID that helped us is we started to actually, you can use calculators now to be able to think, what's the safe space that you need? And the bottom line is, if you have big spaces, there's an opportunity for a few more people with CF that we spread out. And we want to make this inclusive. We want to be able to have some of the community there. At the same time, we want to continue to be safe. So that the specific data in COVID was actually using some COVID calculators. COVID's even more transmissible than the typical CF pathogens. But really it came down to is that we can still safely add a person with CF to an event like this for about every 2,500 square feet. And that's on the really, really safe side. So that's why we said, let's move in this direction, let's learn as we go, but let's base it on data. And anyway, so that's the background on that. And we look forward to continuing to learn and to make this tuned right, what's best for people with CF. And then in the meantime, we'll continue with, obviously, the virtual participation to find that right balance. So now I'm going to go to one of the things that's just come out is that there was a change on the label related to actually all the modulators, not just Trikafta, to say, make sure that we're monitoring for mental health. But talk a little bit about what that means, also maybe the RETRIAL, and I think one of the questions is, are we seeing any changes as people start modulators earlier? Are there any evidence of more mental health issues in young kids? So I'll throw it your way. Actually, we don't want to rush through this one because this is an important one, but take it away.
Sure. Well, one of the things, first thing is the big picture. The mental health effects in the original studies didn't show up. So in our placebo-controlled studies, there was no sign of those sorts of problems. But and in fact, as the different occurrences were starting to be noted by clinicians, by people with CF, by their families, people started to pay much more attention to this. And in fact, there's been several studies that have looked at, on the population level, how neuro effects were being observed. And what they've seen in the biggest studies is the average kind of mental health problems actually are better on modulators than they are on average. Of course, this makes sense. If you turn on the CFTR gene and your clinical health is better, then a lot of things improve, and including on average mental health. Nevertheless, there are people that seem to have problems from their mental health. We know that from individual case reports or case series. The biology of why that happens is still not well understood. There's been some ideas, but none of them have really held water to really make us think we have the smoking gun about why this must be. Nevertheless, we know at the individual level this can occur, and what Vertex has done is add this warning to the label. It's not a black box warning, but it is a warning that tells us what we've kind of already known for the last few years, which is some individuals, for reasons we don't understand, can have neuropsychiatric symptoms or mental health issues, and we need to watch for it when you start the medicines.
The question about starting earlier is a great question, and there's a study called TIDES 2.0, and the overall goal of TIDES 2.0 is to establish the prevalence of depression and anxiety in a pediatric population. TIDES, the original study, did this in adults and really showed some dramatic correlations between lung function and outcomes and depression and anxiety. So TIDES 2.0 is going to do this in children, but there is an aim that really is going to look at those children that are aging into modulators. So really having that opportunity to take an individual child that has not been exposed to modulators and watch what happens when they do start modulators. So TIDES 2.0 is enrolling right now and is across the country. And then the other thing that we realized is a kind of gap is the screening. So the recommendation is to screen your patients for any sort of mental health changes. But how? The range of symptoms is enormous. It goes from anxiety to depression to irritability, mood swings, difficulty sleeping. So what we have is under development and currently being validated is a screener specifically for side effects related to modulators. So that work is underway, and hopefully that will give us the tools we need to make sure everybody is safe and able to take these modulators.
One of the things that's made it really hard to sort is that globally, the rates of anxiety and depression are going up in developed countries. This has been going on for over a decade. It's obviously prominent in U.S. news, and so you've heard about that among people with or without CF. It's happening globally as well. We don't know the reason, but it makes it hard to sort when CFTR modulators have been around for about the same amount of time as this global problem. What's cause and what's just true and unrelated.
Yeah, and I think another key thing is when you look at the overall, this is the difference of averages and individuals. If you look at the average mental health of people that start modulators, it gets better. It gets better, but that doesn't speak to the individuals. And so that's why we want to make sure that we're looking carefully.
Yeah. I agree with everything that's been said. I would just add one additional warning, though, is for people not to make any changes in their regimen on their own, but to have these conversations, share decision-making with their care teams. So if there are symptoms of concern, share it with your providers. People have been doing this now actually for years and have been making adjustments of dosing and frequency and so on. So people are addressing the individual experiences. And I just would encourage for people not to see the label and all of a sudden say, I'm going to stop taking my medicine. Have those conversations.
Perfect. That's very good. Al, I'm going to ask one for you, which is somebody said, do you have, for colonoscopy, since we got that, do you have to get that at your CF center?
Oh, no, absolutely not. You can have that done with the GI person of your choice. What we would like to see, though, is that there is communication occurring between your preferred gastroenterologist or colonoscopist and your care provider, your CF care provider. But it does not have to occur at your center.
Perfect. Yes, great. That'll make the person happy who said, I have a 4-hour drive. So, Dara, what are we doing to make sure that the new physicians and new researchers come into CF?
Yeah. So we have a whole really department dedicated to making sure we have the research workforce to really stay ahead of the game and make sure we have those researchers there to answer the questions, the old questions and the new questions as people get older with cystic fibrosis. So we have grant programs to bring people into CF. We have retreats to try to also encourage people to come into CF. And we actually ask for our researchers to look for opportunities where we can bring new people into CF. I think one of the areas is imaging, where typically radiologists aren't necessarily thinking about cystic fibrosis, but when we can connect them with pulmonologists, they can come up with some really great ideas on how we can take imaging of lungs. So there's a lot of things going in the background that we really try to strive to bring new ideas and new faces into CF.
That's great. There's a couple of different questions about the decreasing number of pediatric CF diagnoses and what's up with that. And maybe a couple of things here. One thing is, in general, the birth rate across all of CF and non-CF is declining, so that's reflecting that. The other thing is the number of second births, the second SIB with CF is less because there's some of the approaches now that you can take with IVF, where you can actually make sure that if you decide you want to pursue this, that your second child would not have CF. And so all those things have led to some of this decline over time. So I think there was a couple questions around that. Steve, I've got one that you're going to love, which is from Laura Gordon, and which is specifically about read-through compounds.
Yep.
And are we done with those, or where are we at? And then also the other question is, could AI help us? There's some AI questions in general. Yeah.
Okay, good. So we are very interested in translational read-through molecules. It's been an area that has been part of the kind of research environment for some time. And it's been a major focus of my own laboratory's efforts and that of some close colleagues that I work with. One of the things to be excited about is that obviously it uses small molecules to generate translational read-through and cause the treatment of premature termination codons, which is one of the big mutation groups that is unaddressed. And because we know about small molecules and how to develop those successfully through our work with Vertex and all these other companies, it's kind of a tried and true path for us. Here's where we are. There's a major effort and multiple new classes of medicines that cause translational read-through that have been duplicated at other labs, so we know they're real, are now in our hands. And multiple of them are really pretty good chemical series, in that we have a large diversity of molecules that work on a similar mechanism. And in fact, in the last year and a half, we've made major improvements to potency. So whenever you're developing a small molecule, you got to get the potency really high. That means you can use a small amount of the drug and generate a big effect. And we've done that this year. We're bringing the potency down a couple of logs and into that nanomolar range that we think is kind of a go category. The issue is the amount of read-through that's happening in terms of CFTR function isn't yet over that threshold. So the current notion is that we're probably going to have to use 2 molecules to work together. This is similar to the glass ceiling that Bill, sitting in the front, coined when we were resulting in correctors for Delta F508 that couldn't quite get over it, that we decided we needed 2 molecules to do the job. So we're at the same point in that development as we were in with read-through molecules, and we're working with teams that are allowing us to test these multiple combinations of classes of medications faster so we can jump over that efficacy threshold. Among the things that we're considering to help us do that is to use some of the excitement around AI to help make the medchem cycle go faster. So we are contemplating that because certainly we want to leave no stone unturned in terms of turning the read-through strategy into something that can really help people with CF.
We magically had some extra time up here. We now have 5 minutes. It's a very slow clock. We've got 4 minutes and 56 seconds. They must like you guys. They must like you. Al, tell me about, one of the questions was, Kalydeco has been out there now for over a decade, coming up almost on 15 years. If you look at the registry, is there any signs of long-term treatment with Kalydeco leading to more trouble? Is there any things that we're discovering that's trouble, or has it mainly been good news?
It's mainly good news. Really, no troubles and fairly stable lung function throughout, some slight decline, but much slower rate than what we'd experienced before. So it has been a positive experience from what we can see in the registry data and from what we know.
Yeah, these aren't antibiotics. You don't get resistant over time. You continue to have that benefit. So that's wonderful. Dara says women's health is often underfunded and that there's been a history of CF women having worse outcomes than men. Are we doing anything to look at this?
Yeah, so we have an actual working group that's focused on reproductive health, including women's health. And this group is probably one of the most active groups in terms of improving our understanding of these disparities, why women may have worse outcomes. But I can say, since there has been modulators, that gap is closing. So those worse outcomes that we saw before modulators is actually lessening. So that's really great news. But we do support women's health research, and we are always open to wonderful ideas and supporting great ideas.
Great. All right, I think you guys give me one closing thing that you're maybe excited about or that you're looking forward to. I'm going to come back to you in a second, so I'll give you a chance to think about this, but I wanted to address this question. It said, with such significant health improvements across much of the CF population, especially in children who started modulators so young, can kids with CF start to hang out together in person? We still need to be cautious. We're going to talk about this. You've heard this, that even with modulators, infection can still be an issue. It's one of the challenges we want to continue to address. So it's wonderful news, the progress we're making, but I think we want to find a balance, right? We talk about maybe being able to have a few more people in big spaces, but those same rules that we had before, those same guidelines, I should say, to try to keep people safe, still apply, and that's 6 feet. And obviously you can always think about with your own doctor and work specific things out and talk with them, but infection is still an issue even with modulators. It highlights the work we still have to do. So the real answer to that is no. You can't just sort of say, oh, our kids are doing well, we can hang out together, because you never know when you're going to get sort of surprised by something. And we want to make sure we're on the safe side until we're fully have brought this story home. All right, so I'm going to maybe close up with each of you to say it's wide open field in the last 2 minutes here. Anything that you want to that we haven't talked about that you'd like to, or something that you're looking forward to as we look ahead?
Of course, one of the things I'm pretty excited about is that how we take that baby KJ experience and turn it into something amazing. It's how I started my morning before breakfast, had my first conference call on taking one of those base editors and bringing it over to an animal with CF so that we could cure it and pave the way for a particular nonsense mutation where these base editors work well. So we are going full blast on those sorts of efforts. Having said that, maybe I'll just mention one other thing, and that is we started venture philanthropy. and the success that we're all experiencing today with the Vertex molecules, we can be incredibly proud of how that has come to full fruition. And But what we're working on now is how to take venture philanthropy 2.0. And we've built an entire team to try and develop the sort of collaborations that are going to be needed in the genetic therapy era. The business case for genetic cures is not as strong. That's one of the uphill battles that we have. If you give a one-time treatment that cures a disease permanently, you can imagine if you're somebody that's used to selling drug all along for somebody else's life, it's harder to make money. And so we are going to need to alter the system to make that happen for people with CF and ultimately get to the cure. So what our team is now doing is developing the sort of collaboration between those that have the gene editors, between those that have the delivery molecules, and the academic groups that could deliver that, like the baby KJ experience, to ultimately make a plan that could be sustainable to ultimately get to where we want to go, which was all persons with CF permanently cured.
Well, I can say, both of my children are on Trikafta, and they are doing phenomenal. I couldn't ask for anything better. But the thing that keeps them home from school now are GI symptoms. So I think what I'm really excited about is our deep dive into trying to make movement in improving these GI complications. So I'm excited to get the GI task force up and running. I'm really excited to see these collaborations between our researchers and the people providing care. Please take that survey and share it. This is how we're going to be able to prioritize, how we're going to be able to target where we can make the most impact. So I'm excited about that.
Perfect. Dr. Faro, bring us home.
And well, to the person who asked the question about the colonoscopy, I've been digesting on that, the one thing to be really aware of is that your colonoscopist knows that you have CF and understands that the fun part, the clean out, is different and much more intensive. So just remember that. What I'm excited about is that the seeds that we've planted with programs to bring in endocrinologists, gastroenterologists, mental health providers are going to come to bear. The fruit is going to come to bear as we broaden access through this network. So I'm really excited to see that come to fruition.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, thank each of you. Great job. Looking forward to